I didn't know who was going to show up to this thing, so maybe I can just get a gauge of like where everybody's coming from. Like, how many people here work on like Filecoin, like core dev stack? Come on. Around the core dev stack. How many people here work on like public goods funding mechanisms? Um, Tell me, like, yeah, for the folks that didn't raise their hand, like, what brings you here? And I'm trying to think of what other categories of what people are interested in here. Is everybody here like a nucleated company? I don't even get that sense. Is everybody here a nucleated company from PL? Okay, but still not everybody. Um, yeah, tell me. What brings you here?
I'm one of the folks who are still at PL. I'm part of the finance team at PL.
Finance
And,
team.
yeah,
Okay, cool.
interested in public goods funding and learning more about what's going on.
Got it. Cool. Okay. Maybe I can set some context first of like how I imagine we can structure this conversation, and then maybe we can split off into working groups with like people who can actually solve different parts of this problem. But I think one of the things that I want to get us out of in the public goods world is a scarcity mindset. It's like a zero sum mindset, right? A zero sum mindset would be, okay, there's a fixed number of things and we're trying to like draw down on this fixed number of resources, and we're trying to just, yeah, fund the public goods that we want to do, but like, um, I don't know, it'll dwindle over time, right? I think we're here because we believe in a positive sum mindset. And I think effectively what a positive sum mindset means is that like the network needs to grow. And part of what public goods funding mechanisms are here for are to grow. And I'm actually really glad they put us right after the PL alignment token, because I think there is a little bit of a lack of, at least for me, like clarity on clear direction of what growth looks like in this ecosystem and what good looks like in this ecosystem. I think we're all here because we kind of feel it. That's at least why I keep showing up. But like, I don't know that we've ever like written down exactly what it is that we want growth to look like, or healthy growth to look like. And then we can kind of go back and like talk about the mechanisms of like how we actually get there. And maybe PL alignment token is a big part of that. And maybe retro PGF and other mechanisms like it are a part of that. But like, it's trying to take a little bit more of a first principles approach of like, what does growth look like in the network? I don't have a Google Doc and I'm not as organized as you, but I'm curious if folks have any thoughts on what good growth looks like. Good growth.
Was anyone here for Marta's leadership principles protocol network? Yeah, I'm wondering like if that is maybe a tie over, because that was sort of like an emergent. People were naming like, okay, kindness, adaptability, kind of like values. So maybe it's like, do we incorporate values into the way that we grow? It's not just like growth for the sake of growth, but also sort of these more like layering that on top of it to help direct growth.
Yeah. Would you say that's part of culture, like what kind of Hoka described earlier?
I think so. Yeah.
Is there a way to measure values, or is it like, how do you tell whether or not you're moving in a good or a bad direction?
So I mean, something we do on the legal team at PLCS is in our team meetings every week, we'll like talk about one of the leadership principles we have for our team, and we'll share like examples of where other people embodied that principle, or where we saw it, or where we embodied that principle. So I think it just kind of like keeps it top of mind for people, and then you kind of have that sort of lead by example. So it's not necessarily like hardcore like measuring it, but it is a way of sort of keeping it at the forefront and encouraging it.
Yeah. But like year over year, like, can you go back and say like from 2021 to 2022, it got better or worse? Like, how do you know?
Or there are like consultancies specializing just on that, and like they're like survey tools to try to get at this. So in that way, if you want to do like measure something like that, yes, it actually is possible, and I think you can approximate it fairly well. But I'm not sure if we want to focus on that too much, but it is possible, sure.
Okay.
So one question, I guess, for Protocol Labs people. Why are you giving so much space to public goods funding? Why is it important? Maybe that's helping people like us in public goods funding understand like what we can do. Like, why is this important to you, I guess?
Who has the authority to answer on behalf of Protocol Labs? I don't think I do. Andrew, do you?
I don't know if I have the authority to answer on behalf of Protocol Labs either, but my take would be that the PL mission is to drive breakthroughs that can push humanity forward, and it's pretty clear that there are areas in which humans are not coordinating together as well as they should be, and that if we can invent new mechanisms for doing that get adopted, it potentially is a very long lever that can be transformative for many things in the world, and like fits within this just broader economies and governance. Like, how do we improve our economies and governance area that is really important to PL?
I have a strong opinion, but I don't know that it represents PL. Obviously, I do believe that public goods are a good in itself. There's an axiomatic element of that, which like there are people in the ecosystem that feel that way. I feel like you guys are also like that, and I feel like Octant, for example, is another team that like clearly sees that, and that's awesome. I think there's a more pragmatic answer sometimes that we have to give that I also am okay with, which is that I genuinely believe that public goods ecosystems out-innovate closed ecosystems, period. And the example that I like to give is like, I don't know that we'll ever see a new operating system ever again, and I'm okay with that, right? It used to be the case that there were a lot of proprietary operating systems, and this was a healthy market. And it was the case that like, you know, if you wanted to compete, you would start from scratch and you would go build your kernel, or you would hire Bill Gates to go do that or whatever. And at that time, Linux was a joke, right? Like, I don't know how many other people tried to use early Linux distributions in the 90s and the 2000s, and people would look at you with a curious eyebrow, like, why are you even doing that? And like, fast forward to today where that's just like night and day. And maybe like, there were a set of things that like fueled that, right? Like, could Android have grown as quickly and compete with iOS as quickly as they could have without that? No, like there's pragmatic economic answers for why it fuels growth. Could we have developed the full Kubernetes cloud orchestration world that we have now with as much sophistication as it has now, with isolation and the auto scaling and all that other crazy stuff in a multi-tenant cloud without like a baseline to just build off really quickly? Like, I think open source software is one of the biggest accelerants for our economy, broadly speaking, that we've ever seen. And if we can channel that really well in an ecosystem, Ethereum is actually, in my opinion, a relatively recent but interesting example of that, where all this Solidity tooling and the developer velocity that comes with all this advanced developer tooling, like in our lifetimes, we're seeing this play out multiple times over. And I think like there is a pragmatic answer here where I'd be curious to see it's more obvious in the Filecoin ecosystem. It's a little bit less obvious in the PL ecosystem. Like, what are the public goods that actually accelerate growth faster than other economies? And, you know, you can see this anecdotally, right? Like, think about the type of crazy shit 18-year-olds are building at hackathons today compared to like 20 years ago. It's like insane the amount of stuff you can produce now and how quickly you can do it. And that's because of things like open source software. But in order for any ecosystem to be able to do that, you have to have a clear thesis of where you're going. I think the Linux Foundation, and specifically the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, has a clear thesis for how scaling clouds looks like, right? And I think like the ML ecosystem and PyTorch and TensorFlow is a clear answer for what scaling AI innovation looks like, right? And I think Ethereum roughly has a clear picture of what like scaling Ethereum developer velocity might look like. At least like it's a little bit more hazy, but it's a little bit more clear. And I don't actually have a good sense of what that looks like in PL, and I'd be curious to get more thoughts here.
I don't have like additional thoughts specific to this, but like also on the broad theme, I think I would like kind of the vision of like the Paritotopian world that we could live in, where like if we actually would cooperate more, we can accelerate so much faster towards something that is good. And that is kind of like a vision where just the competition doesn't bring us there. and I think that on like the kind of like North Star point for like why public goods are like so important, and then just looking out to like the things that protocol labs also produce of like Lip2P and IPFS, for example. It's just like those things like don't work with a business model with like as a private good. So in that way, like I think there's also from the history of like what came out, and like if we believe that those things are important steps towards progress, then that is kind of like furthering that and thinking about what does it actually take to produce the next big open source like tooling library, etc. And I think that is also something that is so underappreciated, that like open source software like costs so much money to develop, and that's I think like part of the hard problem that we need to solve, because it's like so much free labor that goes into the open source software. If you would actually account for that, or like everything would be like nobody would actually fund it. And like how do we fund that in a way that recognizes the contributions that really went in is something that I feel like we try to figure out.
Adding on that, I think the best answer I've ever heard is the one that Andrew told me in SF. And I don't know how much you publicize this. Like sometimes I don't see it enough in the talks, right? But like you mentioned governance and funding allocations. You mentioned human rights. Sorry, what was the third one?
Breakthroughs in computing.
Breakthroughs in computing, yeah. Right, and like if you take each one of those, okay, now we've narrowed the scope a little bit at least, which is great. For each one of those, let's say human rights, because that one I didn't, I was an academic for a long time, and that one really like, resonates with me, right? Like, what does that look like? I think we're talking about things like end-to-end encryption and privacy. I think we're talking about things like anti-censorship and freedom of speech. I think we're talking about like ability to organize through DAOs and other things like that, right? And like, I think it'd be great to have more working sessions like this, where as a network, as a community, we decide, like we develop a picture of what good could look like and like what we're working towards and how we measure towards that. And then like, how do we produce the elements of the ecosystem so that the rate of innovation towards that accelerates well beyond like the alternative, which is like a terrible, manipulative, value extracting like alternative that we live in today, right? And I don't know, like just looking at a microcosm of what this could look like, just looking at Ethereum wallet innovation in the past is like kind of a cool example, right? Where, yeah, we all complain about the wallets, but like the fact that it's open source enables for forks and innovations to happen really quickly. So you have these terrible experiences first, and then like MetaMask is getting better and better over time, but there's a million wallets now that can fork that and go do other things. And then there's like all these libraries that enable like really portable like hot wallets or embeddable wallets, and then that enables things like Privy to like go build new abstractions that integrate with existing identity systems. And now there's all this ZK stuff that can build on top of that. Like that is a microcosm of like what innovation could look like, and much faster than if a proprietary company came in and wanted to solve this from scratch, which is super cool to see. And I don't know. I feel like I wanted this to be more free-form discussion, because I feel like I'm still struggling to figure out what that could look like for one of these three tracks. Say like human rights, right? And like how do we start that flywheel going? And IPFS Lip2P was like a great step in that. And I think right now we're at a point where we're like trying to find support for this. But I think like the more ambitious goal, the better goal, if those are the two substrates that we want to start with, is like, okay, how do we build like how do we iterate on that? How do we fork that faster? How do we like...
So I actually have another question for you guys. What do you think what's something that hasn't been built that Protocol Labs thinks is going to enable the next round of builders to come on board? Is there like a hypothesis? I mean, it doesn't need to be unified. Maybe you have one, you have another one, and you have another one. I don't know. But is there something like that is not there? I think that can help us, right?
I totally agree. I think one of the things that Vitalik does really well in the Ethereum ecosystem is you'll be
Yeah,
like,
when he publishes this.
yeah, he publishes some intention, and it's like, we need more DAO stuff. And
And we all
people go
follow
crazy and they start doing more DAO stuff. Or like, we need more account abstraction, which is like such a small niche
Yeah.
thing. But then like a bunch of people came in and did a bunch of crazy account abstraction stuff. And that like North Star setting regularly like helps the ecosystem so much.
And it's a credible voice. Right. So
Yeah.
so you also need that.
Yeah. So to some extent, Juan did that at Funding the Commons more. Like this time, he stayed more abstract, but in the other years, he actually tried to like formulate like 8 different goals for the Funding the Commons ecosystem. So there is something like that, but I think that it didn't unfold the same power yet to align us towards that specific goal.
And to your point about those pillars, I've always wanted to like see them like written out in a place I can go back to. Like at PLCS, I think I've asked a couple people like, do you have the slide with the pillars on? Like I want to see them. So sometimes it's like a very simple thing to orient people around that, because then I could like, you know, what to the extent I have like my time to come up with a project, I can keep that in my mind and I have a stronger mental model because I can refer to it, and not to bring the like to overdo the alignment asset. But I'm just thinking if that is, if those are the pillars we're prioritizing as a network, and we gave companies the alignment asset and said, if you have projects, or it basically could give people permission to give folks on their let folks on our team do projects in that space in order to get the alignment assets. You could kind of like have it flow through. Again, we want to keep companies focused on their mission, but to the extent people want to do like Google's 20% time or something, and people pick something in one of those pillars, maybe that's what you get rewarded for with the alignment asset.
One thing that comes to mind for me when it comes to this topic of accelerating network growth, and the focus areas and things, is there is a lot of really cool overlap between the PL focus areas, right? So just to recap, the 3 are digital human rights is the first one. The second is economies and governance, which includes PGF and decentralized science and basically new coordination mechanisms like DAOs and pop-up cities and things like that. And then the third one is breakthrough technologies like AI, robotics, longevity, and a fourth that is getting split out next year in neurotech. And it's really cool to see some of the overlap between these, where like PGF supports open source development in the Web3 space, and decentralized science can really support advances in, neurotech or longevity or things like that. One thing that comes to mind for me is that the network is so broad, and the spaces that we work in are so noisy that it is difficult to focus the network's attention on a set of things that really help drive the network forward, right? So like we don't have that Vitalik type energy, and many teams in the network I think most people in the network are very aligned with the general culture and mission of like, let's push humanity forward, and like, let's not do the scams or the casino type thing, but like trying to take that energy and that desire and orienting it towards a smaller number of things that we coordinate together across is pretty hard. So if we have mechanisms to support that, I think that'd be really valuable.
So I think right now, like a little bit what happened like earlier with the discussion about like the public goods, like how can we work together as like kind of a hyper team or whatever we call it, is actually like defining a mission as an umbrella around multiple teams. And I think it's interesting that like, yes, we have like a mission for the whole network, but now we can also take like parts of the network and put umbrellas around that in kind of almost like a bottom-up way. But it's clear how that actually fits together with like the big umbrella over the whole network. And there's a question of like, is that not something that we can do more of? And this actually like aligns very much with kind of the idea from there's the research by Marina Mazzucato on like the moonshots and like how can you actually have a mission-driven economy? How can you And like, I mean, there are like EU programs that are designed after that, and it's like a lot of bureaucracy. So there's also like a lot of like mistakes that can be made if you try to do that, if you try to like align everyone like that. But at the nonprofit that I worked at before PL in Germany, we called it Open Social Innovation, and we basically looked for like it was like NGO, for-profits, activists that all worked on the same problem. For example, like climate change in agriculture and nutritional systems, or around COVID, or around the problem of plastics. So like, and then really coordinate that, like those actors. And like we also noticed that like sometimes it's too broad, sometimes it's like too narrow. But like, how can you then encourage like even like sometimes mergers in the NGO space? Because that doesn't normally happen. But like sometimes you find out like actually we like should bundle our resources. So, and I think there's something where we can try it now with like the public goods teams. Like, can we actually align on like this is the goal, this is the teams that we need to get to this goal, and is that something that can also be done in other areas about like digital human rights? Like I couldn't name you like the five teams that directly work on that. But that would be great if I could be like, oh, there are like 5 amazing teams that work on digital human rights, and they all work on like privacy, and they have kind of an idea of like what is really the challenge. And then we can also like the really cool thing that we also could do is we could then build an umbrella brand around this, the teams that were in one mission, and engage, like, I mean, we engaged like the German state, foundations and all of that, that every single team was too small to engage with them. But together we were like, we have like 100 teams, and like, yes, there were also really shitty teams in that, but we can always highlight like 10 really cool teams that we could like present to like the Minister of Agriculture and get their support for the whole program.
I had a crazy idea for the PL alignment token. I would love to get your feedback and tell me if this is like not doable. Sorry, did you get it?
You should probably continue. The transaction costs between nucleated startups is starting to get more expensive, and we're losing the benefits of being a company. No one knows what they should charge each other, so no one knows what the proper price should be of their services. And how do you discount that for PL within network? Public goods metrics, like better public goods metrics, might be the only way. Like taking a step back from open source, just within the PL network, like how do you do better measurement of these public goods that everyone's using, so that the startups don't start like going off for themselves, you know, doing everything for themselves and like just charging like startups. That's a problem I see right now.
Very briefly on that, like the cost of coordination is like something that we sometimes like abstract away. It's like coordination is great, and like I fully agree. And like also at the nonprofit I worked at, we saw that like we pushed everyone towards more coordination, and at some point we were like, okay, maybe we pushed them too far. So there is something where like the cost of coordination is real, so I think it's a good reminder.
Yeah, I really like that. I don't know that I've anything constructive to say aside from that I totally agree.
Maybe the alignment token can help, but maybe there's like a better within network metrics of like people using each other's services and the dashboard for that could help with how public good should be funded within the network. And then discounting that as a whole across everybody might be better than discounting open source.
Yeah, I love that.
Almost like a tax. Kind of? Oh, a discount. Oh, okay. A discount. Okay, yeah, because I'm thinking if everybody has to pay in to fund public goods. No, not?
I'm a startup. I want to make money, right? I need to show revenue because as a startup to my investors, right? To also who are also PL. But like another startup, right, you know, who's also a PL startup wants to use my services, I have to now, for the first time, I have to figure out a price for them. And that's getting more expensive for everybody. And then
Right.
PL ends up having to fund all that pricing initially because no one wants to pay for things because they're not used to it. So that's currently the problem of like decentralizing that isn't being addressed.
Got it. And is the problem of appropriate price discovery part of that, or is it more just like having to incorporate that expense into business in general?
Both. It's both, and the price discovery should have a PL network discount, but it's not being considered.
Got it. Okay.
And maybe the PL alignment token can reward like more connectivity within the network, but with discounts and other lower friction between companies.
Yeah. I mean, I think that would be a good outcome.
Okay, could I share the crazy idea with you? And I think it's related to like these tracks. So like one of the things that we could do is actually just incentivize towards the types of outcomes that we care about. So it doesn't necessarily have to come in the form of this is a privacy company trying to solve privacy in this particular way. Like there are a lot of companies that build things that lack privacy just for expediency, right? And it boils down to the fact that it costs money and engineering time to think about doing it in a responsible way. It's not because they don't want to do things in an irresponsible way. They don't want to do. It's not that they want to be doing things in an irresponsible way. It's just that like it costs energy and time to end-to-end encrypt something or something like that. I think like my favorite example of like impact in the real world was like when WhatsApp got bought and they made $1 billion. They effectively did an alignment token. It's not an alignment token. That's a terrible word. But like an alignment fund that rewarded towards a particular set of values, human rights and privacy. And what he ended up doing was giving $50 million to the Signal Foundation to help engineer the end-to-end encryption into WhatsApp. And that was one of the most impactful things we could have done for privacy, right? And so maybe the retro fund is like how many people in the world you've brought privacy to. And that's like one of the WhatsApp integration could be one of the most valuable ones. The Signal application could be a close second. And then like there's a whole tail of like startups that are trying to outcompete and trying to like be the next thing that does that better, right? But there's like a set of funds or a set of tokens that help shift not just individual startups, fresh startups towards a certain set of behaviors, but if you factor out the companies that explicitly try to manipulate like non-privacy practices for advertising or whatever reasons, there's only a handful of them, right? Like there are a bunch of companies that are privacy violating for just expediency purposes, right? Anyway, but that's just one example.
A prize or something. Basically, like a prize or an award for companies or teams that move the needle on supporting privacy for the world.
Yeah, or a retro fund that funds how many people you've actually improved the lives of privacy for, or a retro fund if it's decentralization and anti-censorship and network resilience, then a retro fund for how resilient is the availability of like content addressable data, right? And like with Cloudflare in mind, but also with all the different smaller storage providers and things in mind.
But Ray, your example was not retro with WhatsApp. It was looking forward, right? You were like, here is 50 million for someone who can help us encrypt. So that's not retro.
Yeah. Well, I this whole thing in the Filecoin section about how I think as you start to, in my opinion, as you start to do retro funds more regularly, you start to blur the line between what's prospective and what's retro, right? Like if you're actually funding on a month basis, on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, on a per minute basis, like what's retro and what's prospective becomes really blurred. What actually matters is you're actually paying for outcomes, and we might want to actually just be rewarding people based on like how many lives you've affected and improved or something like that, right? And maybe it has to be paired with a set of upfront prospective bets that we make on specific ecosystems. And even in the optimism world, we're moving towards that as well, where every retro fund is also paired with a set of prospective grants that help establish a set of practices, but then we also have this retro fund that try to accelerate the outcomes. But yeah, I agree. There is probably a dual system that helps achieve those goals.
I think there's also actually a role to be played for like more traditional prices, because prices can be used not only to like reward those who do great jobs, but also to highlight what do we value in the network. So if we have like 5 categories and every year, maybe twice a year, we give out a prize to highlight these are the champions in these 5 categories, we tell also everybody else like this is great. And then we maybe have like also like, oh, these are kind of like the nominated teams and these are like the 3 winners. So everybody like sees what is good. And that transports also values and everything else. So there's a huge lever that we do with that. And the funny thing is like we don't actually have to get it fully right. So it's not about like, oh yes, we actually compared these 5 teams with each other and this is like the best team. It's like actually just communicating who is actually like kind of doing the work that we value in the network is already like amazingly good. And like there's like an example of like there's a global teachers award, and like there's no way that we find the best teacher on the planet, or that like the nominations actually make sense, but like it is just to show the world what good teaching really is, and like a prize and prize money helps to like signal that and put attention to it.
I don't know if this is an idea or not, but here it is. I think at the end of the day, when, like with your example, the WhatsApp thing, it's a really good team that tackled that problem. So at the end of the day, that's what you want. You want to attract these top builders. So at the end of the day, it's like, okay, what's important to us? Digital human rights. Who are the best builders? Let's talk to them and cater to that. Anyone can join, but those are my real, like, those are the people I want to bring in. How do I incentivize them to come in and look into this problem like seriously? Right?
Yeah.
Is that an idea, or I don't know? Maybe that's.
I totally
what
agree.
we're talking about.
I totally agree, and I would actually generalize it to not just people that are looking for new projects or people that are looking to do side projects, but I would actually +1 that to the broader tech ecosystem, like a random, staff engineer at NeonDB or Cloudflare or what I mean, like people that are building real products. Can we shift their behavior towards building, say for example, towards digital human rights? Like I think there's a lot of potential here to actually just steer the behavior of existing companies and bring them into the network.
How can we get 4 to 10 hours of your time per week? Like, how can we do that? Talk to them. Like, what are your current projects? Why are you going there? So it's more of a discovery, user research, or, yeah. But someone needs to say who are the good ones in each space, and I don't know who knows that, but probably someone knows. I don't know.
Question. I don't know if this has been discussed already, but just curious if retro can be used to incentivize paying customer deals. So as an example, I'm talking to this company called Mantle Technology. They're basically like this multi-cloud solution that does erasure coding over like multiple clouds, like Google, AWS, and they want to potentially add Filecoin. So I introduced them to CID Gravity to have that discussion, and they're potentially interested in moving forward. I mean, if it makes sense to give them like, I don't know, 20 grand so that we can build a pipeline where they're using their sales pipeline to bring data into Filecoin, and that results in CID Gravity or whoever making like 50 grand a year, is that something that retro can be used for, or is there a pathway for something like that? Because that's just one example of like many customers that I'm talking to where the conversation's sort of stuck there because they're asking for a grant. And it's not to say that they won't do a deal with us if they don't get one, but they're asking. And if they could come to us instead of, say, StoreJ or whatever, it would be nice to be able to offer that as an incentive.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I would take one step back again and just say, like, what are the outcomes that we're trying to incentivize? with Retro. And if one of the outcomes is deal flow in between PL companies, maybe that can juice that and help that. Maybe if the outcome that we're driving towards is more like multi-cloud robustness, like availability of information, even in the face of failures, which is I think part of the IPFS thesis and the Filecoin thesis, then like maybe that can like, but it has to, with the retro funds, usually the way that we think about it is that we scale the amount of funding that you get relative to the impact outcomes that you're actually driving forward. So I think we'd have to pick a thesis.
Yeah, in this case, I would say the outcome is like number one, paid deals, and then number two, PMF, because at the end of the day, the holy grail of PMF is customer feedback, and we need as much customer feedback as early, as often, and as much as possible. And so if I have like a bunch of deals where I could potentially get them pushed through with the incentive, like I think that's the thing that's missing here. Like how much BD is being done across the whole ecosystem, like for paid deals, like outside of like in Web3 and Web2.
Please come to the Filecoin. We're gonna do a PGF one specifically around Filecoin, and if the objective is high quality paid deals, what would the PGF mechanism look like? Like that's what we want to do this afternoon. So please come. But
Okay, I was going to say something, but then the last thing you said made me change my mind about what I was going to say. Does that BD for paid deals process directly benefit the people doing that or not?
Yeah, 100%. They would.
Okay.
It opens up a pipeline for these other companies with their own sales pipelines to now store with them and pay for it.
Okay,
Yeah.
because and granted, I am newer to PGF, but I guess I would not as much. In my mind, it's not as much something that would further incentivize behavior that already has like commercial outcomes tied to it, but rather like what would be the infrastructure that people don't necessarily derive revenue for, but that would accelerate that outcome. So for example, someone doing like a workshop or like BD strategy session that doesn't directly lead to like, you know, talking to customers and bringing revenue in, but helps companies that are doing BD be able to do it better. Or like for PMF, like I need to post this in the PMF channel, but I have like sort of a document that the former CMO at a large tech company came up with that helps people do like PMF exercises really quickly. So it's like those sorts of things where it's like, what is the infra that would allow that BD to happen more like faster or efficiently rather than incentivizing the people doing BD who are already getting the benefit of the revenue that comes in from those efforts? I don't know. I'm again, maybe a hot take. I'm not sure.
no, I think it's in the same page. Like another example we can look at is these cloud incentive programs. So Google Cloud for Startups is an example. AWS Ignite is another. And like it's usually education paired with direct incentives, but it tapers off over time because in the beginning it's hard and you don't have that much money and they want to set you up with the VCs, but they also know that cloud costs are expensive. And if you're actually trying to build your product, like maybe those first 2 deals is what sets off the flywheel for everything else. So maybe it's actually worth subsidizing literally $100,000 per startup to make that happen in the first 2. But then, yeah, some of them are going to fail, but you want to set them up with education and VCs to help continue that flywheel. So,
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think discerning between a good and useful deal to those outcomes is important. And that's part of the process is figuring out, you know, how much initial data are you going to store, like talking to the customer, how much are you going to give us after that, how much benefit do we get in terms of PMF? Like, is this like an AI company of which there are 10 others building similar platforms? And if we land this one, we can use those learnings to land the other 10. Like, if we can evaluate that and give money to certain things that make sense, then I think we should do that because the infrastructure is also good. Like we should, you know, for 100% we should do that too. But to me, like, you know, general startup wisdom is if you want to find PMF, you need to talk to customers. You need as much of that as possible.
thank you so much. I just want to thank you guys for coming. We do have lunch served now. We will have an afternoon session to talk about more PGF stuff. And I think this conversation was kind of early on because it's a little bit more broad and a little bit ill-defined, like what the goals are. But I think it's really interesting in the context of the new PLL alignment token and how, all the things that we can do there. In the afternoon, we're going to go really specific into like Filecoin growth and like what are the outcomes we want to drive and how do we help things like that work and how do PGF mechanisms help make sure that things like that work. So yeah, please join us in the afternoon for that. Thanks.